What does respect really mean when all the rules seem to be on your side, yet you're still treated as if you don't belong? Picture this: you hold a first-class ticket, paid in full, your name printed clearly on the boarding pass. You've worked hard your whole life to earn that seat, and yet, at the gate, a stranger in uniform looks you in the eye and says, "Not today," while handing your seat to someone else. This wasn't just an inconvenience for Dr. Olivia Grant, a black CEO who had built her reputation on discipline and empathy. It was a reminder of wounds too many people know: the quiet humiliation of being told you are less. At that moment, Olivia faced a choice: walk away quietly, or stand and turn her pain into change. Now, imagine yourself in her place. Would you swallow the injustice, telling yourself it wasn't worth the fight? Or would you draw a line, not just for yourself, but for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong? This story is about what happened next, how 30 minutes of cruelty led to an entire airline being grounded. Stay with us, and please like, share, and subscribe before we begin. The terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport was buzzing with the usual chorus of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and impatient footsteps. But amid the crowd, Dr. Olivia Grant walked with quiet grace. She was 55, tall, dressed not in designer flash but in a tailored navy suit that carried dignity more than labels. Her stride was unhurried, her presence steady. Anyone who looked closely might have noticed the silver streaks in her natural curls or the calm fire in her eyes. She held in her hand a boarding pass first class, seat 1A, the front row, the seat she had chosen weeks in advance, knowing she had a 12-hour transatlantic flight ahead. Olivia reached the gate. Behind the counter stood Harold Briggs, the night supervisor for Atlantic Skies Airlines. His jaw was sharp, his tie slightly crooked, his eyes carrying that flat authority of someone who enjoyed enforcing rules more than understanding them. When Olivia handed over her pass, Harold barely looked at her before tapping on the screen. A thin smile spread across his lips. "I'm afraid your seat's been reassigned," he said, not lifting his gaze. Olivia blinked. "Reassigned. There must be some mistake. This is 1A, first class." He shrugged, almost relishing the moment. "Not anymore. The system shows you're in economy, row 23. The words landed like a slap. Passengers in line shifted uncomfortably. A few eyes darted between Olivia's poised frame and the smug certainty in Harold's voice. Olivia took a slow breath. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "I purchased this ticket weeks ago. I confirmed it yesterday, and I have the pass in my hand. Tell me why it was downgraded." Harold leaned in, lowering his tone but not his arrogance. "Sometimes these things happen. Seats are limited. Priority is given to frequent travelers." At that very moment, another passenger approached the counter: Edward Collins, a white businessman in his early 60s, carrying a leather briefcase and the air of someone who believed the world owed him comfort. Harold's demeanor shifted instantly. His shoulders straightened, his voice softened. "Mr. Collins, perfect timing. We've secured seat 1A for you." He printed the pass and handed it with two hands, like an offering. Olivia's jaw tightened. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue. She simply looked Harold in the eye and said, "This isn't about a seat. It's about respect." But Harold only turned away, pretending she was invisible. The walk down the jet bridge felt longer than usual. Olivia carried herself with dignity. though inside her chest a storm brewed. Passengers glanced, some with pity, some with the quiet complicity of those grateful it wasn't happening to them. She stepped into the cabin. The flight attendant, Karen Doyle, intercepted her. "Economy is this way," she said, her tone clipped, finger pointing back like a traffic officer. Olivia lifted her ticket again. "This says first class." Karen barely looked. "System shows economy. Please, don't hold up the line." The ache was familiar, not the seat, not even the humiliation. It was the echo of decades, every room she'd walked into where people assumed she didn't belong. Every lecture hall where her brilliance had been doubted, every boardroom where she had to prove again and again that her voice mattered. Her mind traveled back 30 years. She was 25, a summer intern, eager and wide-eyed. She had saved every dollar to buy a discounted upgrade for her first business flight. She remembered the gate agent back then, too, smiling politely as he told her she didn't look like a first-class passenger. She had been forced to the back of the plane, tears burning in her eyes, and here it was again. The same story, a different decade. Olivia inhaled deeply, then exhaled, steady. Not today, she thought. Not this time. She walked to row 23. The economy seat was narrow, the legroom unforgiving. As she stowed her bag, whispers floated around her. A teenage girl, 2 rows back, nudged her father. "Dad," she whispered, "why are they treating her like that?" The man, Daniel Lee, a professor traveling with his daughter Maya, shook his head. He wanted to say something, but the habit of keeping peace in public held his tongue. Maya frowned. "Sometimes silence is worse than words," she murmured. Olivia sat, spine straight, laptop in hand. As the plane filled, she opened it, and the glowing logo of Grant Global Holdings appeared on the screen. Passengers who noticed raised their brows. Few connected the dots. Fewer still realized the woman relegated to row 23 was not just another passenger. She was the CEO of a multinational conglomerate, and within hours, she would be holding the very future of Atlantic Skies Airlines in her hands. The boarding doors closed. Edward Collins settled into 1A with a glass of champagne. Harold walked past the cabin door, his smirk hidden but not gone. Karen offered Edward a warm smile, then shot Olivia a glance that landed somewhere between pity and dismissal. Olivia's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her mind was racing. She thought of the merger documents waiting in her briefcase, of the board meeting scheduled in London, of the irony that she who was about to finalize the acquisition of this very airline was being told she didn't belong in the seat she had rightfully purchased. Her chest tightened. For a fleeting second, she questioned herself. Should I let it go? Should I just get through the flight and fight the bigger battles later? But then she remembered the intern she had once been, the girl who sat crying in the back of a plane 30 years ago. She whispered inwardly, "Never again." Olivia clicked open a secure file. With a few keystrokes, she began logging the incident. Time, date, names, witnesses. This wasn't rage. This was record-keeping, evidence, preparation, because she knew something Harold and Karen did not. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about a culture. And cultures, she had learned, could be rebuilt from the ground up. The plane taxied. Engines roared. Outside the window, the night sky waited. Inside, row 23. Dr. Olivia Grant closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slow, steady. She did not know yet that in less than 30 minutes The humiliation of this evening would become the spark of a reckoning, and when the reckoning came, Atlantic skies airlines would never be the same again. The cabin lights dimmed as passengers shuffled into their seats. A wave of hushed voices and overhead bins slamming shut filled the air. Dr. Olivia Grant sat motionless in row 23, her laptop resting open on the tray table. The screen glowed faintly with the emblem of Grant Global Holdings, but her eyes weren't on it. They were fixed forward, steady, detached, as if she had stepped outside of her own body to watch the scene unfold. She could feel the weight of eyes on her. A woman across the aisle gave her a sympathetic smile before quickly looking away. Two young men in business suits exchanged whispers, their tones somewhere between confusion and disbelief. It was as if everyone knew something about what had just happened but chose to bury their discomfort beneath the etiquette of air travel. People were good at pretending not to see injustice, Olivia thought. It was a skill learned from years of habit. A shadow fell across her row. Karen Doyle, the flight attendant, leaned in with forced politeness. "Would you like water?" Her smile was tight, practiced. Olivia lifted her gaze slowly. "No, thank you." Karen straightened, her eyes lingering just long enough to let her disdain flicker through. Then she moved down the aisle, her tone brightening as she approached passengers in first class. Olivia heard the clink of champagne glasses, the warmth of Karen's laughter as she fussed over Edward Collins. The contrast was sharp. In her peripheral vision, Olivia caught movement. The teenage girl she'd noticed earlier, Maya Lee, was still watching her. Curiosity and unease written on her young face. Maya leaned closer to her father, Daniel, whispering something Olivia couldn't hear. Daniel shook his head, but Maya didn't relent. She whispered again, louder this time. Olivia could only make out the last words. "Why don't you say something?" Daniel's reply was almost inaudible. "It's complicated." Olivia closed her laptop. For a moment, silence surrounded her, broken only by the hum of the engines and the muffled chatter from first class. She rested her hands in her lap, fingers intertwined, and allowed herself to feel the pulse of old wounds rising. She remembered a hotel lobby in Chicago years ago when a receptionist had told her the executive suite was reserved for business clients while handing the key to a white colleague who had booked after her. She remembered a board dinner in Dallas where she was mistaken for catering staff, standing there in her silk blouse while men in navy suits handed her empty glasses. Each memory was a shard of glass embedded deep, and though scar tissue had formed, the ache never left. Her phone vibrated faintly. A message from her assistant blinked across the screenboard session in London confirmed. "Papers ready. Safe travels." Safe travels. She let out a bitter smile at the irony. Safe, maybe, but not respected. She began to type a reply, but paused. Instead, she minimized her email and opened a secure document. With clinical precision, she logged the incident. Gate supervisor Harold Briggs, flight attendant Karen Doyle, passenger Edward Collins receiving reassigned seat, witnesses Daniel Lee and daughter Maya. Notes repeated dismissive language, suggestion of priority for certain travelers. This wasn't just venting, this was documentation. Olivia had learned long ago that paper trails mattered more than raised voices. Evidence had power, and she intended to gather every detail. A sudden announcement interrupted her thoughts. The captain's voice, deep and steady, echoed through the cabin. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Morgan Price. We'll be departing shortly. Weather is clear over the Atlantic. Flight time approximately 6 hours and 40 minutes. Passengers settled in. Seat belts clicked. Olivia glanced up as the captain himself stepped briefly into the cabin, a routine courtesy check. His eyes landed on her. Recognition flickered perhaps from a profile he had once read, or a whisper of her reputation in industry circles. He paused. "Dr. Grant," he said quietly, leaning closer. "I wanted to apologize. What happened at the gate? It should not have happened." His sincerity was unexpected. Olivia studied him. His uniform was crisp, his expression open. Not the kind of hollow apology she had heard countless times before. "It's not you I blame, Captain," she answered softly. "It's the culture that allows this to happen." He nodded, almost relieved that she had named it. "I'll remember that," he said before moving on. Daniel Lee overheard the exchange. His eyes met Olivia's briefly, and in them she saw respect, perhaps even solidarity. He didn't speak, but he didn't need to. Maya, however, was braver. She turned in her seat and whispered loud enough to carry. "You're strong," she said simply. Olivia offered the faintest of smiles. "Sometimes strength is just not giving up your dignity." Maya's face lit up. Daniel reached for his daughter's hand, his professor's mind surely turning over the lesson hidden in those words. The engines roared louder, vibrating through the cabin. The plane rolled forward, heavy wheels clattering on the tarmac. Olivia leaned back, eyes closed for a moment. Inside her chest, the storm had not quieted, but it had found shape. Not anger without aim, but anger with direction. In that silence, she let her mind drift not toward revenge, but toward clarity, toward the meeting waiting on the other side of the ocean, toward the leverage she held but had not yet revealed. For the first time since stepping away from the gate, Olivia felt a current of calm return. She whispered inwardly, a vow only she could hear. "They think they denied me a seat. They don't know they've handed me the evidence I needed. They don't know they've already lost." As the plane lifted from the runway, lights of New York shrinking below, Olivia opened her laptop again. Her fingers moved with quiet certainty, preparing files, gathering threads, weaving together a net she would soon cast wide. Some passengers sipped champagne in the front rows, laughing without a care. Others dozed under thin blankets. But in row 23, a woman many assumed powerless was laying the groundwork for an upheaval. And 30 minutes from now, the very airline that had dismissed her would face a reckoning unlike anything it had ever seen. The cabin was quiet now, a hush settling after the climb into the night sky. Seatbelt lights blinked off, passengers shuffled to find comfort, and trays clicked open as snacks were handed out. Olivia Grant sat motionless, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Her laptop rested on the tray table, but she hadn't touched it for several minutes. She was staring at the reflection in the window, her own face faintly outlined against the darkness, illuminated by the soft cabin lights. There was a strength there, yes, but also something older, heavier, the weight of decades pressed behind her eyes. She let herself drift back to another time, another version of herself, younger, hungrier, but just as determined. She remembered being 22, stepping into the lecture hall at Harvard Business School for the first time. The room had been a sea of ambition, rows of polished young men, crisp suits, confident voices. And then there was her, the only black woman in the class. Her thrift store blazer didn't hide the fact that she came from less. She had been greeted with polite nods, yes, but also with those subtle glances, the ones that said, "Are you sure you belong here?" Olivia had sat in the front row that day, notebook open, pen steady. She recalled the professor asking a case study question, something about mergers and acquisitions, and her hand shot up. She had spent hours the night before analyzing every angle. But before she could finish her thought, a classmate interrupted, his tone sharp, dismissive. "Let's hear from someone with real corporate experience." Laughter had bubbled across the room. The professor hadn't stopped it. That memory lived in her still, not as a wound but as a scar, the kind that stiffened your spine, reminded you why you fought harder, spoke clearer, prepared longer than anyone else. On the plane now. Olivia exhaled slowly, her breath fogging the glass just enough to blur her reflection. The intern she once was, the student she had been, they were with her tonight, and they were tired. Tired of being tested, tired of being underestimated, tired of being told to wait her turn. A voice stirred her from the current of memory. Maya Lee, the teenager, 2 rows back, leaned over again. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her youthful voice trembling with concern. Olivia turned, offering a gentle smile. "I've had worse," she said. Maya nodded, her eyes wide. "It just feels wrong, like they didn't even see you." Olivia let the words sink in. Children had a way of naming truths adults buried under politeness. She answered carefully. "Sometimes the world doesn't see us until we make it impossible to look away." Maya's face lit up with something between admiration and defiance. Daniel, her father, placed a steadying hand on his daughter's arm, whispering, "Let her rest." But Olivia wasn't angry. The girl's words echoed a truth she had carried her whole life. She opened her laptop again, fingers tapping softly. The incident log grew longer. She added details: tone, language, sequence. She added personal notes about body language, about how Harold's eyes lit up when Edward Collins approached, how Karen's dismissiveness had sharpened at the sight of her first-class pass. Details mattered. Patterns mattered. For a moment she hesitated, her hands hovering over the keys. A thought flickered through her mind. Am I exhausting myself chasing ghosts of respect I'll never get? Shouldn't I be satisfied with the power I already hold? She leaned back, closing her eyes. The doubts whispered like old companions. What was the point? She was wealthy now, successful, a CEO. She could buy 10 airlines if she wanted to. Did one downgraded seat matter? But then she thought of Maya, of the next generation, watching closely, learning what dignity looked like by seeing it modeled. If she let this pass, what message did it send? That even at the highest levels, even after building an empire, a black woman's place was still negotiable. Her chest tightened. The answer was clear. No, this is not just about me. It never was. The intercom chimed again. Karen strolled past, offering smiles to others, ignoring Olivia completely. Edward Collins laughed loudly in first class, his voice carrying back through the curtain as he bragged about contracts and deals. The sting wasn't that he had the seat. The sting was how casually the system had decided who deserved dignity. Olivia opened her secure communications app and typed a short message to her chief of staff, begin pulling employee incident reports for Atlantic Skies. Cross-check Harold Briggs and Karen Doyle. She hesitated, then added, "I'll need full files ready before landing." She pressed send. A current of quiet resolve surged through her veins. She wasn't reacting in anger, she was strategizing, moving pieces, setting the board. This wasn't about winning back a seat. This was about forcing an institution to confront itself. The plane rocked slightly as it hit a patch of turbulence. Overhead, bins rattled. Maya gasped and grabbed her father's arm. Olivia placed her palm gently on the armrest, steady, calm. Nothing to worry about, she murmured toward the girl, her voice soothing. Maya smiled, reassured, while Daniel gave Olivia a grateful nod. For that brief moment, the indignities of the evening faded into something simple and human, one person offering comfort to another. Olivia leaned back again, the hum of the engines surrounding her. She let herself think ahead now, to London, to the boardroom that awaited her, to the contracts that bore her signature. The irony twisted inside her how Harold and Karen would never have believed that the woman they pushed to row 23 would, within hours, hold authority over their entire airline. Her lips curved into a faint, almost invisible smile, the kind of smile that came not from joy, but from clarity. She whispered inwardly, "They tried to push me down the aisle. They don't know I'm about to rewrite where the aisle leads." The hours stretched, but sleep did not come. Instead, Olivia replayed her life in fragments, her grandmother's voice singing hymns in a small Georgia church, her mother working double shifts at a hospital, shoes worn thin, her father's advice when she got her first internship. Remember, you don't have to raise your voice to raise the standard. She carried those voices with her like armor. They had gotten her this far. They would carry her through the storm yet to come. And so she waited, calm on the surface, fire beneath. The sky outside was endless, black and vast. But Olivia Grant had never been afraid of the dark, because she had learned, long ago, how to turn the dark into fuel. The plane leveled high above the Atlantic, a steady drone filling the cabin as the seatbelt sign dimmed. A soft glow spread along the aisles, pale blue against the faces of passengers drifting toward uneasy rest. Dr. Olivia Grant, however, did not rest. Her laptop glowed faintly in front of her, the lines of her face illuminated with quiet determination. She typed in silence, her keystrokes deliberate, her mind turning chaos into structure. Beside her, a passenger shifted but said nothing. Most people in her row avoided eye contact, the kind of silence that came not from comfort but from discomfort, people choosing not to acknowledge what they had seen at the gate. Olivia had lived with that silence all her life, and it no longer surprised her. What surprised her now was the sharp contrast between invisibility and recognition being dismissed in one breath and being known in another. She recalled the brief exchange with Captain Morgan Price earlier. His words had been simple, but the sincerity lingered. Not all people were blind to dignity. The problem was never just individuals. It was the structure, the culture, the air people breathed without questioning it. And cultures, Olivia reminded herself, were like soil. They could grow weeds, or they could grow something worth tending. But someone had to plant the right seeds. The curtain between first class and economy shifted slightly. Olivia caught a glimpse of Edward Collins raising his glass again, his laughter booming. He leaned back in the spacious leather seat, chatting with Karen Doyle, who stood beside him with a smile far too wide. Olivia turned her eyes away. She wasn't interested in envy or resentment. She was interested in truth, and truth had a way of exposing itself when recorded and revealed. She tapped the screen again, pulling up a secondary file, Incident Patterns, Atlantic Skies Airlines. The document was already thick with entries her staff had compiled over months, cases buried in complaint systems. Passengers who had quietly reported unfair treatment, but whose voices had been muted by bureaucracy. She scrolled, scanning, noting: a black medical student delayed at boarding, a Sikh man told to remove his turban, a Latina mother forced to recheck a car seat while white passengers sailed past. The pattern was clear. Harold Briggs wasn't an outlier. He was a symptom. Olivia sat back, her eyes drifting closed for a moment. Her father's words came back, words spoken when she was a girl struggling through her first schoolyard insult child. Weeds grow fast because no one bothers to pull them. But your roots go deep. One day you'll change the soil. Her reverie was broken by a gentle voice. Daniel Lee had leaned forward, his expression cautious. "Dr. Grant," he said quietly, "I don't want to intrude, but I recognized your name when you opened your laptop earlier. Are you with Grant Global Holdings?" Olivia regarded him carefully, weighing his tone. It wasn't suspicion, it was respect, tinged with curiosity. "Yes," she answered simply. "I am." Daniel nodded slowly. "I teach economics. I've lectured on some of your case studies. Your acquisitions, they've changed industries." Maya, eyes wide, leaned closer. "So you're famous." Olivia chuckled softly. "Not famous. Just visible in certain rooms." She held the girl's gaze. "But fame doesn't protect you from being invisible when it matters most." Maya bit her lip. "That's not fair." "No," Olivia said, her voice calm but edged with steel. "It isn't." Daniel hesitated, then spoke again. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry for not stepping in earlier. At the gate, I should have said something." Olivia studied him. His apology was genuine, not performative. She chose her words with care. Silence is easy. Speaking up costs more, but sometimes silence costs the most. Daniel nodded, his face heavy with thought. Maya squeezed his hand, as if urging him to remember. A flight attendant approached then, offering snacks. Karen again. She placed a bag of pretzels on Daniel's tray with a polite smile, then looked at Olivia. The smile vanished. She dropped the bag onto Olivia's tray with a perfunctory flick, not even pausing. The difference was subtle, but unmistakable. Olivia didn't flinch. She simply noted the time, the detail, the action. Every seed mattered. Every small injustice added weight to the whole. The plane shuddered lightly as it cut through another pocket of air. Olivia steadied herself, fingers brushing the edge of the tray. In that brief tremor, a thought crystallized. She realized she had a choice. She could land in London, finalize the acquisition, and move on as if nothing had happened. She could tell herself she had bigger battles to fight. But no. That was the temptation of comfort, the lie of convenience. She hadn't come this far to ignore the soil she was standing in. She hadn't endured years of subtle and open wounds just to look the other way. She opened a new message, her fingers steady. Upon landing, convene immediate review with internal legal and cultural audit teams, priority frontline staff behavior, systemic patterns, accountability structures, prepare board-level documentation. She paused, then added schedule emergency stakeholder session. I'll address them directly. Her chest tightened with the weight of the decision. She knew what this meant. Taking on an airline's culture wasn't like buying another asset. It would be war quiet but relentless, and wars of culture left scars deeper than balance sheets. For a flicker of a moment, she doubted herself again. She thought of the toll, the sleepless nights, the critics who would call her angry, difficult, too political. She thought of how even her allies might advise her to stay silent, to keep her head down and her profit margins high. Her hand trembled slightly on the keyboard. She closed her eyes, whispering inwardly, "Is it worth it?" The answer came in the image of Maya's face, lit with that fierce teenage clarity, declaring what even adults couldn't. "It feels wrong." Yes, Olivia thought, it's worth it. She opened her eyes, steadier now, and pressed send. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached cruising altitude. Sit back, relax, and enjoy your flight." But Olivia wasn't relaxing. She was planting seeds that would grow into something no one on this plane could yet imagine. The hours stretched on, the cabin cloaked in dim light as passengers surrendered to sleep. Soft snores mixed with the hum of engines, and the aisles were quiet except for the occasional footsteps of a flight attendant. "Doctor." Olivia Grant sat upright in her narrow economy seat, her eyes closed but her mind alert. Sleep wouldn't come. The weight of the evening pressed too heavily, and her thoughts moved quickly, one after another, like waves that refused to rest. She could still feel the sting of Harold Briggs' smirk at the gate, the deliberate dismissal in Karen Doyle's tone, the casual entitlement with which Edward Collins slid into the seat she had chosen. These were not isolated slides. They were part of a larger sickness, a sickness she had seen in boardrooms, in hotel lobbies, in classrooms, a sickness so common it had woven itself into the fabric of everyday life. When the landing announcement came at last, Olivia straightened, smoothing her blazer as though preparing for battle. Passengers began to stir, adjusting ties, fixing makeup, gathering belongings. Maya Lee turned in her seat, her youthful face glowing with curiosity. "Good luck," Maya whispered. Olivia smiled faintly. "Thank you." The plane touched down with a jolt, the wheels scraping against the tarmac of London Heathrow. A ripple of relief spread through the cabin, followed by the impatient shuffle of passengers rising too quickly. Olivia stayed seated, calm, watching. As the doors opened, Karen's voice carried over the intercom first-class passengers made to plane first. She cast a glance toward row 23, her eyes brushing past Olivia as though she didn't exist. Edward Collins rose with practiced ease, straightening his jacket, his leather briefcase clasped like a trophy. Olivia waited until the crowd thinned, then she rose, every inch of her movement deliberate. She walked the aisle with a dignity that didn't need announcement, passing the curtain into first class, stepping through the jet bridge and into the bustling terminal. Waiting for her, precisely as scheduled, was a black car. The driver opened the door with a bow, and Olivia slid inside, her laptop case balanced neatly on her lap. The vehicle pulled away, weaving through traffic toward the heart of the city. Inside the car, Olivia's phone buzzed. A message from her chief of staff lit the screen files ready. "Briggs has multiple complaints. Doyle flagged twice in passenger feedback, pattern consistent with bias. Boardroom prepared for immediate session." Her lips curved into a thin line. The soil was revealing its weeds. When the car stopped at the towering glass headquarters of Atlantic Skies Airlines, Olivia stepped out. The building glittered in the gray London morning. a monument to power and prestige. Employees streamed in and out, oblivious to the storm about to break inside. She walked through the revolving doors. The receptionist's smile faltered as recognition dawned. Olivia was not just another executive. She was the woman who now held the controlling stake in their company. She was the face they would soon learn to respect. The boardroom was waiting, a long, polished table lined with men and women in sharp suits. Among them was Harold Briggs, summoned under the pretense of discussion. His arrogance had dimmed since the night before, but not vanished. He sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, eyes darting nervously. Karen Doyle was there as well, summoned for operational review. She looked smaller now, stripped of the authority of the aisle, her smile brittle under the weight of Olivia's steady gaze. Edward Collins sat at the far end, a guest of the board, his influence tied to old contracts and investments. He had no idea why he was there, but he carried himself with the same entitled comfort as always. Olivia entered, and the room fell into silence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply set her case on the table, clicked it open, and drew out a stack of papers. "Before we begin," she said calmly, her tone measured, "I want to tell you a story. It begins at a gate in New York with a passenger carrying a first-class ticket. It ends here, in this room." She let the words linger, scanning the faces around the table. Harold shifted uncomfortably. Karen looked down at her hands. The passenger, Olivia continued, was told she did not belong in the seat she purchased. She was dismissed, downgraded, and humiliated. Another man was given her place. The staff laughed, and the culture allowed it. A murmur rippled through the room. Olivia laid down the first file. Here is the record of Harold Briggs. Multiple complaints over the past 2 years. Families delayed, students embarrassed, passengers singled out for dress, for accent, for skin color, each time dismissed as procedure. She placed another file beside it. Here is Karen Doyle, twice flagged in feedback for disrespectful treatment of minority passengers. Both times ignored. Karen's face flushed crimson. Harold opened his mouth to protest, but Olivia's gaze silenced him. Then she leaned forward, her voice dropping lower, sharper. And here is the truth. Last night's incident was not about a seat. It was about a sickness. And that sickness has infected this airline for years. The silence was suffocating. Even Edward shifted uncomfortably, his swagger dimming. Olivia reached for the final document, the acquisition papers. She slid them across the table. As of this morning, Grant Global Holdings finalizes its control and interest in Atlantic Skies Airlines, which means this is no longer your problem. It is mine, and I intend to fix it. Gasps broke across the room. Several board members exchanged panicked glances. Harold's face drained of color. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. Edward stammered. What do you mean you own yes?" Olivia said evenly, cutting him off. "I own. And with ownership comes responsibility. You thought you denied me a seat, but what you really did was hand me the proof I needed to confront the culture that allowed it." She stood, her presence towering without effort. "So let me be clear. The masks are falling. The truth is here. And as of today, this airline will change or it will cease to exist." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling like a storm cloud. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. For the first time, Harold Briggs looked afraid. For the first time, Karen Doyle looked ashamed. For the first time, Edward Collins looked powerless, and, for the first time, the airline began to realize that the woman they had dismissed was not here to claim a seat. She was here to claim justice. The boardroom air was thick, as though the walls themselves understood the weight of what had just been spoken. Olivia Grant stood at the head of the table, her hands resting lightly on the polished wood, her gaze steady and unyielding. Across from her, a dozen pairs of eyes avoided her own. Each member of the Atlantic Skies Board suddenly reduced from executives to students, caught and silent. Harold Briggs fidgeted with the cuff of his shirt. His bravado had slipped away, leaving only the tight twitch of a man cornered. Karen Doyle stared at her folded hands, her face pale, her mouth pressed shut. Edward Collins shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearing his throat as if to speak, but no sound followed. Olivia allowed the silence to linger. It was a tool she had learned early in her career, the power of letting discomfort do the speaking. She paced slowly, her heels clicking against the floor, each sound echoing like a metronome marking time. "You see," she said at last, her voice calm but sharpened like glass, "this company has been living with a lie. The lie that disrespect is isolated. The lie that discrimination is accidental. The lie that if you ignore the voices of those mistreated, the problem disappears. It doesn't disappear. It festers." She paused, letting the words sink in. And festering cultures don't just harm passengers. They harm employees. They harm reputations. They harm profit. At that last word, a few heads jerked upward. Profit, the language they understood. Olivia pulled out another document, sliding it across the table. Market analysis. Customer satisfaction scores are down 12% in the past 3 years. Negative press mentions have doubled. Quiet boycotts have begun. Do you think those numbers came out of nowhere? A rustle of papers followed as board members scanned the evidence, their faces tightening. Olivia continued, "This is not about punishing one man or firing one attendant. This is about dismantling the soil that allowed them to believe their actions were acceptable." Harold Briggs thought he could decide who belonged in first class. Karen Doyle thought she could decide whose dignity mattered. They didn't invent that arrogance. They inherited it from the culture you allowed to grow. Karen's eyes welled with tears. Harold muttered, his voice low and bitter. "It wasn't personal. It's just policy." Olivia cut him off with a single glance, sharp enough to stop him mid-sentence. Policy doesn't tell a man to smile while he humiliates a passenger. Policy doesn't teach a woman to serve champagne with warmth to one traveler while dropping pretzels on another. That is not policy. That is culture. Her words struck like stones. Even Edward Collins, who had lounged comfortably in 1A hours earlier, shifted in his chair, guilt creeping into his expression. Finally, one of the board members spoke, a man in his 60s, his tone defensive. "Dr. Grant, with all due respect, airlines face complex challenges. Sometimes errors happen. Surely you don't expect us to uproot an entire structure over one incident." Olivia turned toward him, her expression unwavering. "One incident." She gestured to the thick files spread before them. "This isn't one incident. This is a pattern, and patterns reveal truth. How many errors must accumulate before you admit the system is broken, Antenna 100? How many passengers must be told they don't belong before you accept responsibility?" The man faltered, sinking back into his seat. The others remained silent, unwilling to defend further. Olivia leaned in slightly, her voice dropping lower, her tone intimate and deliberate. "I did not come here to shame you. Shame solves nothing. I came here to offer you a choice. Either you reform this airline from the ground up, or I will ground it myself, permanently." Gasps rippled around the table. Harold's eyes widened. Karen clutched the edge of her chair. Edward finally found his voice, stumbling over the words. You would destroy the airline you just purchased. I would save its soul," Olivia said, her tone quiet but unshakable. "And sometimes saving requires burning the rod away." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Olivia picked up a pen and tapped it lightly against the table. "I have outlined 3 immediate reforms. 1, a cultural audit of all frontline staff, conducted by an independent third party. 2, a transparent complaint system where passengers and employees can report discrimination without fear of retaliation. 3, mandatory training not as performance theater, but as immersive, ongoing practice. Failure to comply will not be tolerated." Her eyes swept across the room. "If you cannot commit to this, I will ground every plane bearing the Atlantic Skies logo until compliance is achieved." The threat hung in the air, but it wasn't reckless. It was measured, calculated, and everyone in the room knew she had the authority and the will to follow through. Harold finally broke. His voice cracked as he stammered. I didn't mean harm. I was following." "You were following arrogance," Olivia interrupted, her tone like steel. "And arrogance has no place in the skies." Karen spoke then, her voice trembling. I thought I was just doing my job. I didn't realize." Her words faltered into silence. Olivia regarded her quietly. For the first time, there was no anger in her gaze, only weariness. Realization is the first step. Change must follow. If you cannot change, you will not remain. The room grew still again. The weight of her words pressed on every shoulder, one by one. The board members nodded, reluctantly at first, then, with conviction. They knew there was no alternative. Olivia signed the papers with a single stroke of her pen, her signature bold against the white page. The sound echoed like the tolling of a bell. She straightened, gathering her papers. This is not about one night. It is about every night. It is about every passenger who has ever been told, in words or in silence, that they do not belong. From this moment forward, that ends here. For a long while, no one spoke. Then, quietly, one of the younger board members whispered, "Yes, Madam CEO." The words carried like a ripple through the room. A new order had been spoken into existence. Olivia glanced toward Harold and Karen one last time. The era of masks is over. From now on, every face will be seen, and every voice will be heard. And with that, she turned and walked from the room, her steps calm, her posture unshaken. She did not need applause. She did not need thanks. The silence she left behind was enough, the silence of people who finally understood the gravity of what had begun. The decision in the boardroom was only the beginning. Within hours of Olivia Grant's declaration, word began to spread across the airline's network. A memo drafted by the legal department was circulated internally, outlining the cultural audit and mandatory reforms she had demanded. At first, the employees who read it exchanged whispers in break rooms and sent each other incredulous texts. Is this real? Are we actually being audited for bias? Some were skeptical, others defensive. But for many, especially those who had worked for years in silence, it was a spark of hope they had never thought possible. In a crew lounge at LaGuardia, a young flight attendant named Samuel Ortiz read the memo on his phone and sat back heavily. He had watched colleagues joke behind passengers' backs, seen travelers of color treated with cold indifference while others received smiles. For years, he had told himself it wasn't his place to intervene. Now, reading Olivia's words, he felt a strange mixture of shame and relief. This is the first time it feels like someone at the top actually cares, he whispered to a colleague beside him. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, a customer service representative named Aisha Brown wiped tears from her eyes as she scrolled through the email. She had lost count of the number of times she had been called too loud or unprofessional by supervisors simply for advocating for distressed passengers. She had been passed over for promotions despite glowing reviews from customers. For her, Olivia's reforms felt personal. Finally, she murmured, her voice trembling, finally, someone sees us. The news was not contained within the company walls. By the end of the day, reporters caught wind of the dramatic boardroom standoff. Headlines flooded social media. Black CEO grounds Atlantic skies over discrimination scandal. Cable networks replayed snippets of leaked statements. Commentators debated her boldness, and ordinary people filled comment sections with their own travel horror stories. About time, someone in power called it what it is. One woman wrote on Twitter, "I was denied boarding last year because they said my name didn't match the profile." I knew what they meant. Others were critical, accusing Olivia of overreach, suggesting she was politicizing an industry already struggling. Yet, even the critics couldn't ignore the shift she had triggered. Passengers were talking, employees were talking. The silence that had once protected discriminatory practices was unraveling. For Olivia, the hours after the board meeting were a whirlwind of press inquiries, investor calls, and emergency meetings. But late that evening, when she finally returned to her hotel room overlooking Midtown Manhattan, the adrenaline drained and the quiet pressed in. She sank into the armchair by the window, loosening the cuffs of her blouse. Her phone buzzed with a message from Captain Morgan Price. "You gave a lot of people courage today. Thank you." She read it twice, then set the phone down, staring out at the city lights. For a moment, her chest tightened. Courage was costly. She knew the backlash would come not just from resistant employees, but from powerful allies of the old guard who would fight tooth and nail to preserve their privilege. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. In the darkness behind her lids, images surfaced, Daniel's small hand clutching hers. Maya's laughter echoing in a park long ago. She could almost hear her late husband's voice, too. Warm and steady. Stand firm. Live. Stand firm. The next morning, Olivia arrived at Atlantic's headquarters to find a small crowd waiting at the entrance. They weren't reporters this time, but employees, mechanics in coveralls, ticket agents in navy blazers, cabin crew in neatly pressed uniforms. A woman in her 40s stepped forward, nervously clutching a piece of paper. "Dr. Grant," she said, her voice shaky. We just wanted to thank you." She handed Olivia a card signed by dozens of staff. At the bottom, someone had written in bold ink, "You gave us our voice back." Olivia's throat tightened. She nodded, managing a small smile. "It isn't me," she said softly. "It's all of you, choosing to use that voice." Inside, however, resistance was already forming. William Foster, the ousted CEO, had wasted no time giving an interview to a financial network. "She's reckless," he declared, his jaw tight. Grounding planes over so-called cultural issues puts thousands of jobs at risk. This isn't leadership, it's ego. The clip went viral within hours. Investors flooded Olivia's inbox demanding clarity. Was she jeopardizing profits with her crusade? Was she letting personal grievances drive corporate decisions? Olivia knew this storm would come. In the emergency investor call, she kept her voice calm and factual. Atlantic Sky's financial troubles are not new. What damages profits more than reform is scandal, lawsuits, and customer abandonment. Cultural rot is financial rot. Reform is not a luxury, it is survival. Her words, steady and firm, resonated with some investors. Others remained unconvinced. But, as the call ended, she received a private message from a major shareholder. "You're right. Stay the course." Later that week, the first cultural audit teams arrived. They interviewed staff anonymously, combed through complaint logs, reviewed footage from gate areas and flights. The findings were sobering patterns of bias in seating assignments, frequent dismissals of passenger complaints, subtle but systemic discrimination in promotions and evaluations. When Olivia read the preliminary report, she sat back heavily. "So it's worse than I thought," she murmured. Thomas Reed, her trusted advisor, leaned forward. "It means we're justified in everything we're doing, and more." Yet even as reforms began, whispers of sabotage emerged. Anonymous emails were sent to journalists claiming Olivia was exaggerating incidents to gain control. A leaked memo suggested she planned to replace thousands of staff. One evening, exhausted, she called Gloria Martinez, her longtime friend and housekeeper back in Chicago. Gloria listened quietly before saying, "Liv, remember, light always draws shadows. But shadows don't win, not if you keep walking." The words steadied her. 2 weeks later, she visited an Atlantic training center in Dallas, where dozens of employees were gathered for the first immersive reform program. She sat in the back at first, watching as staff role-played scenarios how to respond when a passenger is treated unfairly, how to de-escalate conflict without bias. Some employees rolled their eyes, clearly resistant. Others leaned forward, eager to learn. Midway through, an older flight attendant stood up. "I've been with this airline 27 years, she said, her voice carrying across the room. "I'll admit, I didn't see the harm in how things were done. But after hearing these stories, after watching passengers break down in tears in our seats, I realize we failed, and I don't want to fail anymore." The room went still. Olivia felt her eyes sting. She rose quietly, walking to the front. "Acknowledgement is the beginning," she said gently. "Change is the journey, and you've just taken the hardest step." The employees broke into spontaneous applause not for her, but for the courage of one of their own. It was the moment Olivia had been waiting for, the first sign that hearts, not just policies, were shifting. Still, the road ahead remained steep. Lawsuits threatened. Critics sharpened their knives. And yet, for every voice of resistance, new ones rose in solidarity. Hashtags like "Nah for Fly" with respect began trending. Passengers posted stories not just of discrimination, but of moments when crew members showed kindness. The narrative was changing. One evening, as Olivia prepared for another press interview, she received an unexpected call. It was Mason Chen, the teenage boy who had sat across from her in economy that fateful day. His voice was bubbling with excitement. "Dr. Grant, I just saw the news. You're really changing everything. My school's economics club has been debating your reforms all week. They even quoted you in class." Olivia laughed softly, the tension of the day easing for a moment. I'm glad to hear it. Mason, remember, real economics isn't just numbers, it's people, always people. When she hung up, she realized that was her real victory. Not just shifting balance sheets or appeasing shareholders, but inspiring the next generation to believe that leadership could mean something more than power, that it could mean purpose. The applause in that Dallas training room echoed in Olivia's mind for days, but it was quickly drowned out by the storm she had known was inevitable. Within a week, 3 major newspapers ran op-eds questioning whether her reforms were performative or financially reckless. Television pundits argued heatedly, some praising her for addressing systemic inequity, others condemning her for what they called corporate overreach. On the morning the backlash reached its peak, Olivia stood at her hotel window in New York, sipping coffee gone cold. Her phone vibrated constantly on the desk behind her. Calls from journalists, emails from investors, messages from staff who didn't know where they stood. She took a slow breath, remembering the advice her late husband once gave her before she stepped onto a stage. Liv, you can't control the noise, but you can control your voice. By midday, she was seated in the studio of a national morning show. Bright lights washed her face, and a host with a practiced smile leaned forward in his chair. Dr. Grant, he began, some say you've gone too far, that grounding flights and demanding sweeping audits risk the stability of the airline industry. Do you regret the way you handled this? Olivia clasped her hands on the table, her tone steady. I don't regret telling the truth. I don't regret protecting passengers from humiliation. What I regret is that it took this long for anyone to call it what it is. Discrimination isn't just a moral failure. It's a financial one. A company that disrespects its customers is a company digging its own grave. The host shifted, momentarily caught off guard by the calm force of her words. But the cost Olivia cut in gently. The cost of doing nothing is greater. The clip was replayed across networks by evening. Supporters applauded her clarity. Critics doubled down. The storm had not passed, it had grown. But Olivia did not flinch. That same week, the cultural audit teams released their first public summary. The data was blunt, consistent patterns of bias in passenger seating, gate assignment, complaint handling, and even in hiring practices. Numbers were laid bare, impossible to deny. For many employees, it was a mirror they had never been forced to look into. For others, it was validation of experiences long dismissed. At headquarters, Olivia convened a press conference. Rows of cameras and reporters crowded the space, waiting for sound bites. She stepped up to the podium, the report in her hand. This, she said, holding it high, is the truth. It is uncomfortable. It is painful. But it is ours. And it is the first step toward change. Her voice softened. For every passenger told they did not belong. For every employee silenced when they tried to speak. For every traveler humiliated for the color of their skin, the accent of their voice, the style of their clothing. This is our promise. It ends here. The room erupted with questions, but Olivia stepped away, leaving the words to stand on their own. Behind the scenes, the resistance sharpened. William Foster reappeared in the media, accusing her of destroying his legacy. Anonymous flyers appeared in break rooms, warning staff that reforms would cost jobs. An internal email leaked to reporters claimed Olivia planned to sell off the company in pieces. One night, near midnight, she sat in her office with Thomas Reed, Exhaustion etched into her face. "They're not fighting me," she said quietly. "They're fighting the mirror, and mirrors can be terrifying." Thomas leaned forward. "Then let them be terrified, because the truth isn't going back in the box." Olivia gave him a tired smile. "You always did know how to remind me why we fight." The next morning, she boarded a flight, not as a passenger, but as an observer. No one announced her presence. No press cameras followed her. She simply sat in a middle-row seat, anonymous among the travelers. She watched closely as the crew moved through the cabin, and to her surprise, she saw small changes. The greeting was warmer, the service more attentive. A man in a wheelchair received immediate help instead of being left waiting. A young black mother with 2 children was offered extra snacks without a sigh or a roll of the eyes. It was not perfect, but it was different. Seeds had been planted. After landing, as passengers filed out, an elderly woman paused by Olivia's row. She leaned on her cane, her eyes searching Olivia's face. "Are you Dr. Grant?" she asked softly. Olivia nodded, startled. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. I've been flying this airline for 40 years. I can feel the difference already. Don't stop." For the first time in days, Olivia felt a swell of warmth in her chest. She reached out and squeezed the woman's hand. "I won't," she promised. But even as she spoke, the storm outside intensified. A group of investors called for an emergency meeting, threatening to withdraw support if profits dipped further. Reporters dug into her past, scouring for any flaw to undermine her credibility. Social media lit up with hashtags both in support and against her. One night, her phone rang. It was Maya Lee, the teenage girl who had sat across from her on that flight weeks ago. "Dr. Grant," Maya said breathlessly, "my dad and I watched you on the news. People at school keep talking about you. Some kids say you're making everything worse, but I told them they're wrong. I told them you're making it better, even if it's hard. I wanted you to know." Olivia's throat tightened. She closed her eyes, listening to the teenager's conviction. "Thank you, Maya," she said softly. "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones worth fighting. Don't let anyone tell you different." After the call ended, Olivia sat in the quiet of her office, her heart heavy but resolute. The storm was raging, but within it, voices like Maya's, Samuel's, Aisha's, and the elderly woman's gave her strength. They reminded her why she had stepped into this fire. For Olivia, this was no longer just about an airline. It was about the possibility of a world where respect was not a privilege, but a given. She knew storms pass eventually, and when they do, what remains is what was strong enough to endure. The storm had raged for weeks, and now it reached a breaking point. The night was late. New York draped in heavy rain, when Olivia Grant sat alone in the boardroom. The city lights shimmered through the glass wall behind her, fractured by droplets. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the far wall. She was exhausted, her shoulders tight, her eyes burning from too many sleepless nights. Yet her mind refused to rest. The phone on the table buzzed. Thomas Reed's voice came through, low and urgent. "Liv, it's happening. The investor block led by Milton Holdings is calling for your removal. They've got the signatures for an emergency vote." Olivia's breath caught. She had expected pushback, even sabotage, but an actual attempt to oust her this quickly. It was a strike meant to break her resolve. She pressed her palm against the table, grounding herself. "Then we meet them head on," she said firmly. The next morning, the shareholders gathered in the grand conference hall, the air thick with anticipation. Reporters lingered outside the building, waiting for the verdict that could decide the airline's future. Inside, Olivia stood at the front, flanked by Thomas and a handful of loyal board members. Across the room sat Robert Milton, the sharp-eyed head of Milton Holdings, his expression smug. "Dr. Grant," he began, his tone condescending. "Your reforms have caused chaos. Passenger confidence is shaken. Profits are down, and your obsession with so-called culture wars is destabilizing our company. It's time for new leadership, responsible leadership." Murmurs rippled across the hall. Olivia let them die down before speaking. Her voice was calm, low, yet carried to every corner of the room. "Mr. Milton, let me remind you of something. This company was already bleeding before I arrived. Your numbers look strong only because the truth was buried under denial. What I am doing is not destabilization. It is surgery, and surgery always bleeds before it heals." Milton scoffed. "Fine words, but words don't pay dividends." At that moment, Olivia raised her hand, and Thomas slid a thick folder across the table. "Numbers do," she said. "This is the latest data from our audit. Complaints are down 35% in the routes where reforms have already been implemented. Customer satisfaction scores and pilot programs are up 20%, and bookings from minority and international travelers, previously our most dissatisfied segment, are rising steadily." The shareholders leaned forward, eyes scanning the pages. Milton's smirk faltered. Olivia pressed on. "You asked for proof. Here it is. Not dreams, not slogans. Proof. This company can either be remembered for profit built on exclusion or profit built on respect. And I assure you, only one of those survives the test of time." The silence stretched, heavy with decision. Finally, one of the largest shareholders, a woman named Evelyn Carter, spoke. "I've seen enough. Dr. Grant stays. The vote to remove her is denied." The room erupted into overlapping voices. Milton slammed his folder shut, his face red with anger. Olivia didn't flinch. She simply inclined her head, her dignity intact. "Then let's get back to work," she said quietly. But victory came with its price. Later that night, back in her hotel room, Olivia finally allowed herself to crumble. She sat on the edge of the bed, her face in her hands, trembling. The fight had taken so much her energy, her peace, even her health. She remembered the look of disappointment in her daughter's eyes years ago when work had pulled her away too often. She wondered, not for the first time, if this relentless struggle was worth it. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a video message. She pressed play. On screen, Samuel Ortiz appeared, the young flight attendant who had been inspired by her reforms. Behind him stood a group of crew members, smiling nervously into the camera. "Dr. Grant," Samuel said, his voice earnest. "We heard about the vote today. We just want you to know we're with you. We've started a group among staff, sharing stories, holding each other accountable. You gave us the courage to look at ourselves honestly. Please don't stop. You're changing things, even if it doesn't always feel like it." The screen went black. Olivia sat there in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wiped them away slowly, breathing in and out until her chest steadied. The doubts didn't vanish, but the strength to keep going returned. The following week, she flew to Chicago for a scheduled town hall with employees. The auditorium was packed pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, agents. She walked onto the stage to polite applause, but the tension in the room was palpable. One pilot stood up during the Q&A, his arms crossed. "With respect, Dr. Grant, all these reforms sound nice. But do you know what it feels like for us in the cockpit? We're the ones getting blamed when schedules change, when customers are angry. We didn't create this culture. You can't lay it all on us." Olivia met his gaze, unflinching. "You're right," she said. "You didn't create this culture alone. None of you did. But all of us, every single one of us, have a choice in whether we let it continue. This isn't about blame. It's about responsibility. And responsibility isn't a burden. It's an honor, because it means you have the power to change things." There was a pause, then a smattering of applause, growing until it filled the room. The pilot nodded reluctantly, his arms uncrossing. Afterward, as Olivia stepped off the stage, Aisha Brown found her. The customer service rep's eyes shone with determination. "You gave me courage to apply for a supervisor role," Aisha said breathlessly. "I never thought I'd even be considered before, but now I believe I can." Olivia squeezed her hand. "That's the future I want to see. Not just policies on paper, people believing in themselves again." Later, on the drive back, Thomas asked quietly, "Do you think it's enough?" These small changes. Olivia gazed out at the skyline, thoughtful. "It's not enough yet, but it's beginning, and beginnings matter." Back at headquarters, she faced another late night of paperwork, strategies, and endless meetings. Yet, in the stillness of her office, she allowed herself a rare smile. She had not been broken. The storm had howled, and it would howl again. But tonight, she had stood her ground. The winter sun rose over New York, its pale light spilling across the glass towers that had witnessed months of turbulence. In the corner office of Atlantic Sky's headquarters, Olivia Grant stood by the window, her reflection faint against the skyline. The storm had not fully passed, but the clouds were beginning to break. She could feel it, like the shift in pressure before a flight levels out. Her desk was cluttered with reports, updates from the reform programs now rolling out across the airline, employee workshops, cultural audits, new complaint systems, each initiative scribbled in neat summaries. For the first time in years, the numbers told a different story. Satisfaction rising, employee retention improving, customer loyalty beginning to return. The pain of surgery was giving way to the first signs of healing. She turned as Thomas Reed entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He placed one in her hand with a small smile. "You've been standing there for 20 minutes. Thinking doesn't get easier just because the sun's up." Olivia chuckled softly, the sound weary but genuine. "No, but it gets clearer." They sat together at the conference table, the silence comfortable. After a while, Thomas spoke. "We've scheduled the announcement for this afternoon. The rebranding, the new charter, everything. Are you ready?" Olivia glanced at the folder in front of her, embossed with the new logo Horizon Atlantic Airways. She traced the letters with her finger. Ready or not, it's time. The rebranding ceremony drew an audience of hundreds of employees, journalists, investors, and passengers who had been personally invited to witness the change. The hangar where the event was held had been transformed. One of the airline's largest jets parked behind the stage, its old name stripped away, waiting for the reveal. As Olivia stepped up to the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. She looked out at the sea of faces, skeptical, hopeful, curious, and drew a slow breath. 6 months ago, she began, her voice steady, I boarded a flight with a first-class ticket, but I was told I didn't belong. I was asked to step aside, to accept less than what I had earned. And that moment, painful as it was, revealed something larger than one seat. It revealed a culture that had forgotten its most basic duty to treat every human being with dignity. A ripple moved through the audience. Cameras clicked, pens scratched against notepads. I could have walked away. She continued. But I didn't, because this isn't just about one passenger, one crew, or one incident. It's about all of us, about every person who has ever been dismissed, belittled, or ignored because of who they are. It's about rewriting not just policy, but identity. And today, that new identity takes flight. She lifted her hand, and the curtain fell from the jet behind her, revealing the bold new lettering, Horizon Atlantic Airways. The crowd erupted in applause, the sound filling the cavernous hangar. Tears pricked Olivia's eyes as she spoke over the cheers. This name reflects not just where we are, but where we're going. Horizon is about possibility, about the sky ahead, and about the promise that no matter who you are, when you step onto one of our planes, you belong. The applause swelled, and she stepped back, allowing the moment to breathe. In the front row, she spotted Aisha Brown wiping her eyes, Samuel Ortiz clapping furiously, and even the pilot who had once challenged her now standing with arms uncrossed, nodding in quiet approval. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed, a young man approached hesitantly. It was Mason Chen, the teenager who had once sat across from her in economy. He held a press badge now, his eyes shining. Dr. Grant, I'm interning with the news network this summer. They let me cover today. I just wanted to say, you inspired me to go into journalism, to tell stories that matter. Olivia smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. Then tell them with honesty, Mason, that's how change really begins. As the day wound down, Olivia finally found herself alone in her office again. She sat quietly, the hum of the city below seeping into the stillness. The fight had taken much from her sleepless nights, endless battles, moments of doubt that had nearly broken her. Yet here she was, not victorious in the way stories usually end, but enduring, reshaping, planting seeds that would outlast her. She thought of Maya Lee, calling her in the middle of the storm. She thought of Samuel, standing with his colleagues. She thought of Aisha, daring to pursue leadership. She thought of the elderly woman who had paused to thank her mid-flight, faces and voices braided together into something larger than herself. The knock on her door startled her. Thomas poked his head in. "You still here?" Olivia gestured at the papers spread before her. "Still here." He walked in, lowering his voice. "You know, you may never see the full harvest of this work." Olivia nodded slowly. "I know, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is planting trees under whose shade we may never sit." Thomas smiled faintly, always the philosopher. She laughed softly, then turned serious. "Thomas, do you ever wonder if it's enough? If all this policies, charters, new logos really changes people's hearts?" He considered her question. "Maybe not immediately, but hearts follow when they're shown another way. You've opened the door. Now it's on them to walk through." Olivia leaned back in her chair, her gaze drifting once more to the horizon beyond the window. For the first time in months, her shoulders felt lighter, not because the work was done, but because she finally understood that it was never hers alone. It belonged to everyone who chose to believe, to fight, to hope. She whispered to herself, barely audible, every passenger, every seat, equal respect. Outside. The city lights glittered like stars. The sky stretched wide and waiting, and Olivia knew the journey was far from over. But she also knew she would face it the same way she had faced everything, calm, unshaken, and unafraid to claim her seat. The story of Olivia Grant is not just about an airline. It is about the dignity each of us deserves, no matter where we sit or how we look. Too often, disrespect is brushed aside as policy or procedure, when in truth it reflects deeper attitudes that can corrode families, workplaces, and even societies. Olivia's choice to confront humiliation with courage reminds us that real change does not always come with shouting or anger, but with steady determination and clarity. For older generations, this lesson resonates deeply. We've all seen times when silence seemed easier than standing tall. Yet dignity, once surrendered, leaves scars that last. Olivia teaches us that reclaiming respect is not just personal, it is communal. By refusing to accept less than what is right, she planted seeds of fairness that future generations will inherit. Her story is a call to each of us in our homes, in our communities, and in the institutions we touch. Let us choose respect over dismissal, justice over convenience, and truth over silence. These choices may be costly in the moment, but they leave behind a legacy worth far more than comfort. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Stories like this remind us of the power of dignity, justice, and courage in the face of adversity. If this story touched you, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring journeys. Your support helps us keep bringing these powerful stories to life.